can't remember where, but sometime during 2010, I came across an issue of Game Informer, rest in peace, where it showed this dark blob towering over what looks to be Mickey Mouse. At the time, this was something I'd never seen from the beloved mouse. A darker, more ominous setting and mood I wasn't familiar with. I did what any curious kid would do, and look up this Epic Mickey online, only to see something like this and promptly exit the fuck out of there. Back then I wasn't used to this sort of scary and disturbing imagery. I was easily frightened as a kid, but as a 25-year-old man, oh hell yeah, inject that shit into my veins! Epic Mickey is a game I fondly remember for several reasons, including the mental scarring, and still being haunted by the fact that the collector's edition was just collecting dust at my local Walmart for years that I wish I bought while it was still there. I was glued to it during the short rental period I had with it, loving about every minute of it, even when I bought a copy for myself years later. I have a strong appreciation towards this game, what it tries to explore and what it tries to do. The greatest shock, however, while researching the game, is to learn that the idea for this game went back to 2003 and was pitched by Disney Interactive to the then president and COO of Walt Disney, Bob Iger. But even when Iger became the CEO of the company, there were several setbacks preventing the game from ever being released, including most of all securing a developer to actually make the game. Then in comes Junction Point Studios, a studio founded by Warren Spector, who previously worked at Looking Glass and Ion Storm, pioneering what would be called the immersive sim genre, with Deus Ex, Thief, Ultima, and System Shock. After leaving Ion Storm in 2004, the following year Junction Point was created, first starting out with developing an episode for Valve's Half-Life 2 saga, before being cancelled, and then came what would be called Epic Mickey. After 7 years, it would finally be released in 2010 to fairly positive reception but disappointing sales. It would get a sequel 2 years later that did even worse, and a handheld game that only did a little bit better, critically, that I also never played. I don't know if that game's any good or not. Junction Point would be shut down, and all their projects, including more games in the Epic Mickey series, would all be cancelled and never see the light of day, bringing an end to this short-lived series. Disney Interactive Studios would cease to be in 2016, and nowadays Disney would rather license out their properties to other studios, re-release older titles like from the NES or SNES era, or develop mobile games. It seemed like the likelihood of Epic Mickey returning was unlikely. Was, in past tense. As a surprise to many, Epic Mickey would see a return in the form of a remake, handled by THQ Nordic and Purple Lamp. Purple Lamp being the same studio responsible for the remake of SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom, and creating their own SpongeBob game, The Cosmic Shake. The Cosmic Shake is excellent, by the way. I highly recommend it. I never thought Disney would touch this series again after abandoning it for so long, but here we are. The once Wii exclusive is now available on all major platforms. The Rebrushed version is what I'm specifically focusing on today. I know Rebrushed does change certain things from the original that I'll make note of, the more significant ones, and you can just go on the wiki just to find all of them. What I can say though, is I think Rebrushed is the definitive way to play Epic Mickey, warts and all. So now, let's get into, and talk, Epic Mickey Rebrushed. One fateful night, Mickey enters Yen Sid's workshop through the mirror in his room. Yen Sid just finished up his latest creation. Yen Sid retreats to his chambers to rest, and being the curious mouse he is, Mickey starts messing around with Yen Sid's magic paintbrush and accidentally creates a massive blob that Mickey attempts to erase, only to create an even bigger mess, spilling paint and thinner onto Yen Sid's project, running away back to his world before he can get caught. Decades go by, until the blob reappears and drags Mickey back into the world that he brought ruin to. The two crash land into Dark Beauty Castle, where Mickey passes out and reawakens to him being strapped down by the Mad Doctor, attempting to steal his heart. Mickey breaks free from his restraints, warning off the blob using the brush, with the Mad Doctor escaping for the time being. A rabbit-looking figure is also there, sending the Mad Doctor's machine into a rage, while he also flees. Mickey receives help from a gremlin named Gus, and the two successfully stop the machine. Gus offers to help Mickey escape the castle, teaching him how to use the paintbrush, and notices that some of the blob, now known as the Shadow Blob, which is based off the Phantom Blob, a character from an old 1939 Mickey Mouse comic strip, with its essence lingering inside Mickey with small blots of paint rising from him. In the grand scheme of things, that doesn't really have any effect on Mickey in terms of gameplay, but is a nice visual effect. The brush uses both paint and thinner. Paint to restore items and objects, while thinner erases them. They're the main resource you have to manage throughout Mickey's journey through the so-called wasteland. And for being a wasteland, it's a fairly pretty one. One worry I had going to Rebrush was the game losing its original grim and bleaker art style and atmosphere. Thankfully, the remake retains the original's tone while adding its own flair to it. It's a little more colorful than it was on the Wii, but I still think it retains that moody, oppressive atmosphere, even on the Switch, which has a lower resolution, and not as sharp as the other versions, but I still think it looks nice for a Switch game. The performance could have been better though. It mostly keeps a consistent 30 FPS, but there are moments where it does noticeably tank when too many effects or enemies are on screen, which is thankfully fairly rare, but I do have an issue with the game's hitching. It tends to freeze for a second every now and then before resuming, which can be an annoyance, and it does happen quite often in certain areas. I get it's the Switch, but I feel like this could have been at least touched up through patches or whatnot, and this is with the most recent patch too. There's one other issue I have with the Switch version, but I'll save that for later. The only thing from the original that's left mostly intact was the 2D animated cutscenes done by Powerhouse Animation, which threw me for a loop knowing the same studio that animated the Castlevania series also worked on this game. I still love the art style of them, having this lineless paint-like texture and shading to them. The only difference now though is that they're at a higher resolution, and every mention or reference to the Weird mode of the original is gone, which now makes moments where Gus is instructing Mickey how to do a certain action a little bit awkward, since it looks like Mickey's just randomly swinging his hands around, or cuts to a blank board, which I understand they likely didn't have the resources to reanimate these scenes, but I don't know, you could at least put like a generic controller on screen instead of just a blank board. That's very nitpicky, I know, but it doesn't look great to me. Paint thinner can be used for exploration, to reveal or remove objects in the world, to discover secrets, and for combat against the Bloodlings, which I have to say, the combat is the weakest part of the game to me. It's not bad per se. I like the idea of recruiting and having them fight alongside you, or just erasing them from existence. I just don't find it all that fulfilling, really. You won't be in combat all the time, granted, as Epic Mickey's more about exploring the environment of the world and the characters themselves, which I think it does a great job with. It feels about one-to-one the same as the original, and in Rebrush's case, they added new moves to Mickey. You can now, for one, sprint. I never thought the original movement speed was that slow, but I do at least appreciate having a faster movement speed. A ground pound that I never really used for combat and only really used to bounce higher off certain objects, or negate fall damage. There's also now a dash that I rarely use since the combat's never been that chaotic enough to warrant one. The biggest change of course is how you aim the brush itself, now acting like any standard third-person shooter, and it works pretty well. If you do miss the motion controls of the original, there is gyro aiming. During our little trek through the castle, we come across a dilemma, either saving a fellow gremlin, or opening a treasure chest. Epic Mickey gives the choice of either being a selfless hero, or a straight up dick. Morality systems were sort of a popular thing to do around the late 6th and 7th gen, with games like Infamous, Spider-Man Webs of Shadows, which is listed on Wikipedia for whatever reason, and no, not yet. In this playthrough I decided to be the goody two-shoes, saving any fellow gremlin along the way and helping anyone in need with a particular issue, or at least attempting to do so, as it's very possible to fail certain quests if you're not careful enough. Well, I think having a morality system in a game like this is pretty neat and can open up for new options and scenarios. In execution though, it leaves much to be desired. For one, a lot of the choices do boil down to if you want some e-tickets, or a pin that's a collectible for collectible's sake. Only a few have some sort of effect on the world or characters, like choosing to help the phone in Mickey's house in exchange for a gremlin's wrench to proceed to the next area, or letting the gremlin kill the phone. Freeing the gremlins at least has some sort of effect on the world, as they can reveal certain areas and items, or fix objects to make platforming and collecting pins a little more easier. Minus the few times you have to pay them, like, dude, I just help you, and you're asking me to pay you? Like, get the fuck out of here. Just go run around it for a bit. There's like an easy 100 tickets if you just look around, asshole. There was this one quest though I swear was bugged. Early in the game, Small Pete confronts Mickey asking them to help clear their name, after accidentally crashing their ship into the Gremlins' village. I wanted to do the good option and clear their name, so I went to the boat, got the evidence and showed it to Bennick to confirm that Small Pete was indeed innocent. Right when I was about to leave the area as well, Gus states that there are some unfinished quests in the area, and proceeding would make completing it impossible, which is a new feature they added to Rebrushed. I saw that the quest didn't proceed in the quest tab, so I ran around talking to every NPC, and Bennick again, to see if I was missing something. But it turns out I did do the quest right, and clear her name, only after I entered the projector. It feels like an oversight that could have left some players confused as to if the quest was bugged or whatever. I don't know, they could have just at least taken away that prompt after completing that part of the quest, so you don't confuse players, and thankfully this is the only quest in the game that really does this. Mickey and Gus end up on Mean Street, Gus explains to Mickey that the Wasteland is a world where characters, ideas, or whatever the sort, whenever they're forgotten by the real world, until the Thinner disaster, where most of the pain of the world was wiped out and the Shadowblot and its underlings invaded the land, all of which was Mickey's fault. The concept and world building are both incredibly well done, but also pretty depressing, especially considering that some of the characters that live in the Wasteland, like Horns or Clarabelle, remember their past adventures with Mickey, except for Mickey, who looks so downtrodden trying to remember them, like, damn. Like, it's a pretty depressing idea. But I mean, it looks like they're living their best lives at least. Mean Street is one of the main hub worlds of the game that's home to several shops for items and upgrades. There's also the cinema where you can give reels to the usher for bonus items. You get these reels from the projectors Mickey jumps into. The projectors are the Wasteland's source of transportation, and are recreations of classic Mickey cartoons like Public Domain Willie. I think the projectors are some of the best and some of the worst parts of the game. It manages to retell and recapture the key moments from the original cartoons. They're fun trips to go through once, as in the original, if you needed to backtrack to a different area for a side quest or plot progression, you have to go back and forth through the projectors, and it gets pretty tiring. You could skip them by giving Gus 10 e-tickets, which I have to say, why the fuck I have to pay you 10 e-tickets for fast travel? You're my friend, aren't you? Only for one major issue with the Switch release, that being the load times. Holy shit. Sometimes they take up to 30 seconds to load, making those quests where you have to go through multiple projectors just to complete them a massive slog. Not to mention, booting up the file from the main menu alone can take up to a fucking minute. Sweet Jesus, I know it's the Switch again, but my god. Okay, back on track, we headed to the mountains in search for Oswald, the leader of the Wasteland, and the older brother to the mouse himself. For context, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit was one of Walt Disney's and of iWorks' earliest creations back in the late 1920s, becoming incredibly popular for a period until Walt Studios lost the rights to the character to Universal. Shortly after that, Walt Disney would create the mouse himself we know today, while Oswald would fade into obscurity, ending up in the Wasteland. Until Epic Mickey was conceptualized, and what has to be my favorite piece of trivia for this game was the Disney trade Al Michaels, a sportscaster and a real-life human being, for a fictional cartoon rabbit that has been relevant for nearly 50 years at that point. That's certainly a hell of a trade. Upon first entering Mickey Junk Mountain, we're introduced to sketches.
It's Tomorrow City, you fucking idiot!
Temporary items that can be summoned. Sketches aren't something I use all that often unless it's for a puzzle or progression. The exception is the anvil, which makes killing Beetleworks a hell of a lot faster. Beetleworks are a different type of enemy in the game. They're more mechanically interesting to fight compared to the blots. They just take longer, and they like to respawn often too if you don't shut down their generators. After dealing with Oswald's trials, Mickey confronts him, and despite Oswald's resentment towards the mouse, he still offers to help him leave the Wasteland, as only Toons with hearts can return to the Toon World. The group heads to Tomorrowland to learn that the rocket Oswald planned to use is missing several parts, all taken and scattered by the Mad Doctor. Mickey now sets out to find the parts, with conveniently one of them being held by the boss of the world, Pete Tronic, and the only Tron reference you're going to get in this game. I feel this is the appropriate time to bring up the bosses, which are a highlight in this game, as this is where the paint and thinner dynamic really comes into play. Some are more noticeable than others. Pete Tronic, for instance, loses parts of his suit, making him more friendlier with paint, or has to be my favorite fight in the game, Captain Hook in Ventureland. You can thin him out on the deck, which I remember doing in my first Wii playthrough, but for the paint method, you have to do a platforming trial to reach the mast of the ship, while Hook is firing paint and thinner to free the spirit for Pete Pan to regain his flight, and have him fight Captain Hook like in the original story. Also, yes, there's multiple Petes in the Wasteland, don't ask me how that works. It'd also be a sin for me if I don't bring up the soundtrack, because, damn, this soundtrack is fantastic. Composed by James Dooley, Epic Mickey's soundtrack still has that whimsy that's in other Disney movies, while also having the neat effect of having it change depending on if you're, say, use more paint or thinner in a certain world. Going back to Ventureland, I would say that's my favorite world in the game. Amaya's accidentally stealing a mask for the shopkeep side quests. Oops. This is where my collectathon brain kicks in, as there are plenty of nooks and crannies to find optional quests and also items that can benefit Mickey on his journey. I got lost in this world and honestly had a lot of fun with it. There's not a world in the game I would say is bad though. Maybe it's a small world, it's probably the weakest one being the starting world of the game, but I think it's fine at the very least. Bog Easy I like for the color scheme and atmosphere alone. The Haunted Manor isn't too bad either. This is also where we learn that the Mad Doctor turned himself into an animatronic to try and take control of the Shadowblot, which didn't end up working out in the end. So long, Doctor, see you next game. After collecting all the parts, the trio rush back to Junk Mountain as the Shadow Blot is attacking the bottle that's located there. After befriending the Blot, which turns him into a big sweetheart, they successfully reseal the bottle. Oswald explains that the Shadow Blot and all the Blotlings we've encountered are just the creations of the real Blot that is sealed inside the bottle. Oswald was the one to seal it, but at the cost of his wife Hortensia becoming an inert statue. Oswald offers Mickey a handshake and an apology for being overly hostile to him on his adventure, but Mickey also confesses he was the one who caused the thinner disaster to begin with. In a rage, Oswald accidentally breaks the cord that's sealing the Blot and releasing it back into the wasteland. And you know it's the real one because it's jacked as shit. The Blot holds Oswald and Gus hostage, with Mickey giving up his heart in exchange for the two's release. The Blot now unleashes its Blot tentacles, sucking up all the paint that remains in the wasteland, to make it strong enough to invade the Toon World. Mickey must now travel through all the previous areas, and honestly what feels like padding at this point in the game, and these load times do not help the case either. After dealing with the Bloticles, Mickey, Gus, and Oswald attempt to use the rocket to reach the Blot, and retake Mickey's heart. That plan fails as the Blot absorbs the paint from the rocket, which wasn't one of Oswald's greatest ideas. They end up back in Dark Beauty Castle, now planning to use the castle's fireworks to blast the Blot out of the sky. The fireworks are set, but Oswald, Gus, and Hortensia, who happens to be there, are sucked into the Blot with Mickey's following suit. Mickey soon frees his heart, and despite Oswald's desires, he returns the heart to Mickey, and finally Oswald sets off the fireworks, destroying the Blot and launching everyone into the sky. Mickey ends up back in his world, only to meet Yen Sid, while Oswald lands on Mean Street. With the Blot's destruction, paint falls from the sky, restoring the wasteland and bringing Hortensia back from her inert state. Before Yen Sid seals the mirror, he shows Mickey the results of all the decisions he made throughout his adventure, and lets him talk to Oswald one last time, with the two finally becoming brothers. Ending Epic Mickey's story. I do like it, don't get me wrong. I think it has a lot of interesting character dynamics and such. My major gripe I have with the story is the fact that your decisions doesn't affect the overall outcome of the story. You can be the biggest dick in the wasteland, ruining the lives of those you meet along the way, and making life harder for everyone else, including Oswald, but in the end it still plays out the same no matter what, which has to be the most disappointing part of the game to me. Quite literally, the only major change are the CGI cutscenes at the end, and that's really it. There were concepts and ideas of Mickey slowly growing more crooked and deranged if he used thinner more than paint, but that ended up being scrapped. Honestly, it would have probably been a nice visual way of showing Mickey's current mortality level. I just wish I could see my decision have some greater effect across the likes of, say, the reputation with the townsfolk, souring over time if I decided to use thinner, like affecting the shops for instance, refusing service or charging more. I don't know, but I wouldn't say this ruined the game for me. No, still think Epic Mickey as a game inherently I really love, as it shows both its love and respect towards Disney's animated history. Quite literally, I remember after playing it on the Wii those years ago, I went online and looked up any classic Mickey or even Oswald shorts on YouTube because I just wanted to learn more about these cartoons. And I'll give Epic Mickey this. It got me to learn about these forgotten characters and worlds, and I think that's incredible. Epic Mickey Rebrushed is a damn good remake, and I can't recommend it enough. I'm curious as to what will happen with this series now, given the revival. Will this be a sort of one and done situation? Or perhaps if this does well enough, Epic Mickey 2 can get the remake treatment. And speaking of 2, why not? So next time, we'll be taking a look at its sequel, Epic Mickey 2, The Power of 2. But for now, I've been SonicMan, and I thank you for watching. Have a good day, or night, whatever, and take care.